I, okay. I just finished watching the Netflix documentary. They shot the piano player about Tenorio Jr., somebody I'd never heard of before. But it brought back a lot of memories to me. And basically, when I studied piano, um, I played Jobim a bit, and then my piano teacher got into one of the same type of music that Tenorio was into. Uh, so the problem being that Tenorio then got disappeared, meaning they keep saying he got disappeared, or he disappeared, but he was disappeared. Um, and then they briefly go into COINTELPRO, or I mean to Operation Condor, which was a based on it was set up with the CIA and funded by the CIA, and so this is a spoiler um, review, but I encourage people to watch the documentary, and I have the link in the chat here for the trailer. So if you have Netflix, you can see the documentary. So there was it started out like they started out in Strand Bookstore, and I've been to Strand Bookstore, so that brought back memories. And then they started talking about the musicians, and it turns out that the bossa nova craze was influenced by West Coast jazz, like Chet Baker, and I had been a big fan of Chet Baker in starting around 1990, so that was soon after I was studied piano in the late 80s. And and then of course when they go into Operation Condor, that's something I had studied from reading Noam Chomsky. I had already known about Operation Condor from his book The Political Economy of Human Rights. And it's kind of tragic that people don't know about Operation Condor very much still. So I'm glad this documentary um, gives an overview of it, even though it's a bit too brief. So I just got this book in the mail, the CIA as Organized Crime by Douglas Valentine, How Legal Operations Corrupt America and the World. And I just got an email response from Douglas Valentine a couple days ago, and he said he was dizzy and he couldn't type on the couldn't look at the computer screen because it was dizzy, and that he had a virus. So my guess is he probably got COVID again. So I'm hoping I told him to take ginger. Of course, I'd never heard back from him, and I'm hoping he is going to be able to recover from that because he's like, I don't know, 75 years old now. But unfortunately, this book of his does not have any footnotes or endnotes, so I can't even look up Operation Condor in this book. But what else? Let's see, we're going on 4 minutes here. Yeah, the other thing is, again, I'm just doing a spoiler on the Netflix doc, but it turns out that Tenorio Jr., his favorite pianist was Bill Evans, and he, of course, he was one of my favorite. He was my favorite jazz pianist, of course, and so Tenorio actually got to hang out with Bill Evans, and they talked music for the whole night. They show that in the documentary, and um, so basically Tenorio, he's considered the greatest pianist of bossa nova. Hello, just doing a spoiler discussion on this latest Netflix documentary about um, this pianist that got murdered by the CIA sponsored fascism in Latin America. And so I just got this book that I haven't even started reading yet, but I'm sure it's going to mention Operation Condor, which is what happened to, yeah, right here. They, he mentions Noam Chomsky's book, The Political Economy of Human Rights, right here on page 353. So that's what I just mentioned before, is that that book was the first that I had learned about Operation Condor in the early 90s, like maybe 95. And so this whole idea that the musician, he had long hair and he was targeted because of his long hair, and they thought because of his long hair that he had communist tendencies, and he had a music union card, and so therefore, because he had long hair and he was a musician, he must have communist tendencies. Well, this was another connection I made suddenly in the documentary, because I was accepted into the University of Wisconsin Madison music composition degree, and I was doing fine. I was getting like whatever normal grades, A's and B's. And then in the orchestration class, I got called in to a meeting. Um, the professor said he needed to meet with me, and he said that your transposition of a Schoenberg piano sonata to a string quartet is communist. And I was like, I was so, and then he goes, I want you to redo all your past assignments. And I had already gotten like, A's and B's on them. So I knew this was just a stupid, stupid situation. But actually, like, had a tear come down my face because I was like in such shock. I'm like, communist? He's like, yeah, you're trying to do equal pay for equal play. And it's like the thought had never come into my mind. But so when they said, well, he had communist tendencies, it's like kind of like, well, doesn't music inherently have communist tendencies? I don't know. I mean, especially if it's jazz. But so then it turns out that he was apolitical, but he was really into yoga. Hello. It turns out he was into even had a song named Samadhi, and he was into meditation, really into Indian Hindu philosophy and meditation and yoga. And so it's like uh I mean, he's sounded like, I mean, he had a mistress, but whether they don't really hold that against him in in the documentary, but I think maybe in that culture too, like having a mistress is like more acceptable or something. Um, yeah, so uh, I think this is a great. The best thing I liked about the documentary is that most people in the U.S. were quick to dismiss Noam Chomsky's political analysis. It's like, well, he's a good linguist, but I don't agree with his politics. But this documentary just it shows how, why Noam Chomsky's political analysis is spot on about the CIA funded Operation Condor in Latin America. Hello. Just, yeah, nobody wants to hear about this. Um, so this would be a good book to accompany the documentary. And of course, we're, we're getting this right now where you get where people are just dismissed as a leftist, so-called leftist, and then that means if they're leftist, they're like subhuman or something. they can easily be subhuman. And so you just find that in human human societies where like human modern thinking. I think that book, the survival of the friendliest, it goes into this where humans are quick to be friendly, but they when it comes to it flips to the opposite extreme where humans get quickly dehumanized. Hello. Just doing a spoiler alert discussion. There's a brand new Netflix documentary. I put the link in the chat for the trailer. Um, and I'm just discussing. I just got this book in the mail about the CIA as organized crime. So yeah, nobody really wants to hear about this. Um, so the question is well, how do you escape this situation where somebody can be labeled to have communist tendencies, even though they're not political at all, but they just have long hair and they play music? I mean, um, obviously, that's like a insane fascist situation. Um, and that's what happens is that human society goes insane, and then they just start targeting people and doing mass murder. And the CIA actually would provide lists, like in the Phoenix program, they provided lists of the people to be assassinated. And the problem was that they realized in Vietnam and Indochina was that the the communists had the political edge that they could convince people, that sharing and cooperation and working together an ideal is more attractive to the poor people than just like brown nosing for some colonial work situation, like where you're basically like a slave to the master kind of thing. And so um so that was the problem that the CIA had, was like, okay, well, we have to try to change people's thinking. And so then the CIA was relying on psychological warfare to try to, you know, change people's thinkings. And that's a problem. That's obviously what fascism is trying to do, is like trying to control people's minds so they don't believe in equality and freedom. And hello. Just discussing this latest Netflix documentary. Uh just a spoiler. Yeah, okay, I lost it too. But so the problem is, of course, that it gets back to Platonic philosophy. Oh, there's the hummingbird. Nice. Uh yeah, because both communism and fascism are both based on industrialization as progress. And so you get like the bossa nova music where they're inspired by the West Coast jazz musicians in the US. And um they're like, obviously they're not, it's like you have to be like really far off the spectrum to not get targeted. Like you'd have to, I mean, the communists were organizing the poorest people in the villages, the indigenous people. And so, and this has been happening, since the 1930s, because the poor people were originally communist anyway. Hello. Discussing this Netflix documentary that's about a musician that was murdered because he was considered to have communist tendencies because he had long hair, and he was in the music union, and this was during the CIA's funded Operation Condor in Latin America. So, sorry to ruin the suspense of the documentary. They keep saying he disappeared, but it's more accurate to say he was disappeared, by the military. And they so I recommend the documentary. I have it on the Netflix. I have the link for the trailer. If you get Netflix, you can watch it. But I'm just saying this would be a good book to accompany it. And as far as the resolution, for me, it's like, well, you got to take music to even deeper level that goes beyond the Western duality of communism and fascism as the two extremes of Platonic philosophy as Western industrialization. And so it's even built into the music as mind control. And that's sort of the deeper irony of this documentary is that even though he was into Indian philosophy and meditation and yoga, even in the Vedic Brahmin philosophy is still part of this problem of a what became this what they call materialistic idealism, because the Vedic philosophy was based on symmetry. So you still had this problem of a symmetric geometry that they call the Brahmin code. So if you study, there's a book called Mathematics for the millions. I think it's called like that, or it's something like Mathematics for the common man on the street, something about that. But that book actually mentions the Brahmin Vedic code, which is or cipher, and that's basically your one-to-one correspondence between geometry and number. And Western music was sort of the origination of that logic, at least for Platonic philosophy. But that kind of like divide and average mathematics can be found in the Zoroastrian and Vedic mathematics also. It just wasn't codified into axiomatic logic using proof by contradiction, which is what Archytas first did using music theory for the irrational magnitude. And so the irony being is that you have democracy that's defined by logarithms as a equal distance magnitude, and that was the basis for equal tempered music tuning. And then you have the inverse of that, which is the exponential function, which is exponential growth, which is the basis of financial wealth for the elite. And you find that corruption, whether it's in communism or fascism, you have this elite that's trying to get this exponential wealth growth from technology, like the so-called efficiency of technology is also based on the same mathematics, the exponential function and the log, and then the higher dimensions expanding as a symmetric logarithmic. You just expand it into once you get into the fifth dimension, that's when you encounter the non-commutativity again, because you have to use they consider it to be complex numbers, but it actually, when you start having to use the square root of -1 as the imaginary number, then you start to encounter this time frequency non-commutativity again, which is this inherent asymmetric time that's eternal flowing, and it's non-local. And that's the truth of the older philosophy of India, the three gunas of Kriya Yoga, and Ramana Maharshi hints at it, but Ramana Maharshi is kind of like he speaks Tamil, which is it's a tonal Dravidian language, and then he talks about the undifferentiated triad. So he has that secret in his philosophy, but unless you already knew it, you wouldn't understand it, because he's otherwise you would just learn what he's teaching as Vedic Brahman uh, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, for Ramana Maharshi. So it's kind of an interesting overlap in the Indian philosophy that Tenorio was interested in. So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of like window into this tragedy that's still in our midst today, where you have this duality of fascism and communism, and when they're like, you can't have communist tendencies. Well, I mean, it works both ways, where the fascists are against intellectuals as doing supposed like unearned work, and so then they act like thugs, and they're like, well, they're obviously just like parasites too, where they're just stealing and doing the pillage and plunder and massacre and genocide thing, and but so you get that both ways, where like the fascists think they're trying to do equality, like they think they're working for the working man also. So you get that fake populist fascism, which is what obviously we're trying to, we're experiencing that in the media right now with the right wing, the Trump. We're I mean, he's really based on like the Epstein child rape situation, which is the ultimate evil of this setup, where you just have this sort of like primate male physiology as the root cause of the problem. And nobody wants to go into that, but that's what the gets back into, that because it's based on how do you address the physiology, and where does this energy of life come from. Like the communists, the leftists will put down the fascists. The fascists will talk about this energy of life, like Trump. He believes in this energy of life, which is like a fascist idea. But then the communists, the leftists, they're trying to be more materialistic, so they reject it. And so and you get this like there's a denial and a repression about what I mean, you have to approach it from quantum physics, because the leftists, they have to be rationalistic and scientific, and so it's only when you take a deep dive into the quantum physics that you get back into this ancient asymmetric time as non-dualism or non-locality, and it goes back to our oldest human culture, the Song Bushman. So I mean, it's just fascinating that in this documentary, or it's not quite a documentary. I mean, they do it in animation style, which is cool. It's a really cool way to sort of, I don't know, dramatize it or whatever. But yeah, it's I don't know. I related to the documentary on a just from a music perspective, since I trained in piano, so I could relate to the piano playing. Um, and Astor Piazzolla is the other musician. I was trying to think of his name before. But my own piano teacher, she actually recorded Astor Piazzolla. I might have done page turning for her when she recorded it. She had me do page turning for her in the studio, the recording studio, which was really nerve wracking because she reads way ahead in the music, and that's why she's such a good pianist. And I haven't had any communication with her since my horrendous piano concert. I mean, I'm sure we talked a little bit after that, but not really much at all. Yeah, feel free to chime in with any comments if anybody's seen the documentary. It just came out on Netflix, so I kind of doubt anybody else has seen it. And sorry about ruining it, like the spoiler alert thing, but I just wanted to get out there again. Like, I just got this book in the mail, and this will be a good supplement to the documentary. And it's this whole idea, like, well, there's this sort of like mainstream US view where you're supposed to accept the fact that we need the CIA as a necessary evil kind of thing. Like, we need to have psychological warfare and torture, and and it's 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 a like or it's like I've had this conversation with people. It's like, well, you know, the CIA is necessary because we you got to have that secret guerrilla warfare going on in the background. But when they're just like rounding up people because they have long hair and they play music and therefore they're have communist tendencies, whatever that means. So, um, this is, I mean, there's like I just did a blog post on this whole idea of the right of conquest was actually the legal standard before the UN was created. That there was no real international law, and the right of conquest was just accepted as the standard in international law. And it's almost hard to believe now, when you think about it. But I mean, it makes sense in terms of Western colonialism. It's like, yeah, we want the right of conquest because that's how we like. um, what the other documentary I just watched was on Ruth Paine. I did a I posted these all on my blog, but you can watch the Ruth Paine documentary for free. You don't have to have Netflix, and that's a really fascinating documentary because that connects back to Qigong master Jim Nance, because he told me personally that Ruth Paine had helped him out to get him into Antioch College and for his degree. And I looked it up, and she was because he told me it was when he was in Philadelphia, and sure enough, she was a teacher in Philadelphia after she had housed Marina Oswald, and and then Lee Harvey Oswald had stored his gun there for the supposed, like the whole documentary is about whether she was secretly working for the CIA. And my claim was like she was an unwitting accomplice of the CIA. And the really telling point to me was she makes this comment that the Philippines came to the US. And then she says she's talking about her husband's trust account, and his because he's a Forbes, like through his mom's side or something like that. And so she said that his wealth came to him. And so she kept using the passive, um like, I mean, it's kind of ironic because technically it's unearned income. It's what the IRS calls unearned income. And if you listen to Michael Hudson, the economist, he has a whole book on parasitical wealth, where they in classical economics they call it rentier, or the creditor class, where you're making unearned income. And so when she says it came to her, like the Philippines came to the US, well, no, I mean it was the it was a genocidal warfare. And then there's like this book, it goes into that in great detail because that's what moved into Indochina, was that Edward Lansdale was doing the psychological warfare in the Philippines against the communists there. And like there was an uprising, I don't know, in the 40s or in the early 50s, and then it got shifted to Vietnam and Indochina, where they use the same. They, where they when I say psychological warfare that includes false flag operations. So the problem with false flag operations is that you don't know what's going on because everybody's like blaming each other. Like we even had that in Minneapolis with the riot or uprising, depending on what you want to call it. But the first fire that was started by the fascist, what are they called, the Boogaloo Boys. They had driven up to Minneapolis, to foment the violence. Um, and I think they got convicted for it finally. But once they started the fire, well, that like set the trend. It's like, oh, let's, like I highly doubt that people would have just started fires, um, unless you had this provocateur who his whole initiative was to and then they had guns too, and they were shooting at the cops at the police station. I got mugged right across from that precinct, and I had my arms up in the air, and I only had $2 on me, so it was kind of like, okay, take my money, Anyway, and of course, no cop came out because that police station apparently I didn't know it, but it was like blatantly corrupt. So anyway, it just exposes the absurdity of modern civilization. And yeah, my 2012 book goes more into this on the political side of it a bit more, like the fascism versus communism thing. And um it's but in terms of somebody who actually got targeted because they had long hair and then because they were a musician. And it's just like I could kind of relate to that because I even got called communist, and I was in the Midwest in the 80 in no, that was like 1992, 1991, something like that. I think it was probably 1992. Anyway, and those guys that did that to me, they had gone to Princeton, and they bragged that all their students could go on to Princeton for graduate school in music. But the irony is that Princeton has very close ties to the CIA, and the CIA created this thing called the Cultural Freedom Congress or something like that. And their whole point was to promote avant-garde music as the alternative. They were trying to prove to the communists that the West was true freedom because we had avant-garde music. And and but by avant-garde, that got into computer serialism, and that's what these guys were into, was this computer atonal. Like they started out with like Schoenberg and Webern, and it's basically like you just like take the 12 notes of the music scale, and then you put them into like basically like computer formulas, and you create computer algorithms, and then that's how you compose music. And the reason they targeted me is because I was critical of them. I was like, nobody's gonna like this music because my view is that we're hardwired to like the natural resonance of the perfect fifth and the octave and the perfect fourth. And if you find that in every human culture uses those basic music tuning. And so they got really mad about that. And but the irony again, it's like, well, the Princeton had this direct connection with the CIA, and I haven't like gone into it in great detail, but I'm sure because they were into the same kind of music that the CIA was promoting. And at any rate, I could investigate it if I wanted to. But the thing is the CIA, like, this is Douglas Valentine's big point, is that the CIA was courting the what they called the what did he call it? Something left. I think it's not like the acceptable left, but there's a term he coined about it, or somebody told him about this. But basically they're like the anti-communist left. So they're socialists, but they're like, liberal socialists or whatever. Um and and that's what Ruth Paine was. It turns out Ruth Paine's parents were, they were very anti-communist, but they were actually like, I think one of them was a Trotskyite or something. I don't know. Maybe that was her husband's side, but yeah, they were into like cooperatives and stuff like that. So you have this sort of like, it gets really fluid, the whole what somebody's politics are, what their political views are. It's sort of like this spectrum where it could be almost anything, and then they're targeting somebody based on their hairstyle, which is really um it's really stupid and tragic. And but it just goes to show, it's like, well, that's what humans do. They become like, you look at the internet now, and they say like the attention span on the internet is what, like, less than a minute now. And so that's what how people are. It's like you're using your primarily your vision to judge somebody, um and then after that it's pretty much like pulling a trigger, and that's what they did is they just shot him in the head and threw his body in a bag, and just because he had long hair and played music and therefore he must have communist tendencies. It's just like really tragic that somebody who could be such a great pianist. But anyway, it's a fascinating documentary, and I'm gonna start reading this book finally. But I got another book. I ordered another book through Interlibrary Loan. Let me go grab it real quick. And I had Douglas Valentine. He mentions how he got he got into this whole subject because he had written a book about his dad being in a military prison camp, and then William Colby liked that book, and William Colby was like the head of the CIA at one point, and William Colby he opened all the doors to Douglas Valentine to write about the Phoenix Project, um, which was, if people aren't aware, I mean, it was a assassination, massacre, basically like a genocide program. They say it was like 40,000 people got killed, but most of them were what we would consider to be innocent people. They were just like villagers who had the wrong. They probably believed in cooperation, and so they didn't. So that um So anyway, what was I getting at? Oh yeah, he was first told William Colby first told Douglas Valentine to read this book and to read a book in the that was at only at American University. It was in their special collection or something. It was somebody's, I think it was maybe like somebody's PhD thesis. And so I looked that up on the world catalog because that covers all the libraries in the world, and I finally found it. And there was only one other book that cited that American University book. So I ordered that book and I got it. I got it. I finally got it, and this is the book right here. And now I can't remember what was the book they were citing. I can look it up. I just haven't looked it up yet. But it turns out that this is published by an academic press, University of Kentucky. But sure enough, the guy who wrote it was a CIA, bigwig in Vietnam, and so he says, in the beginning of the book, he's like, he thanks the CIA for going through and censoring all the classified secret information, and so he uses all the he just calls it pacification. What they were doing was pacification, and that basically the whole point was to stop the communist North from invading the South. And so this whole book is like it's all based on that premise. But he admits that the problem was a for the CIA was a political problem of people having the wrong political philosophy. And how do deal with that indoctrination of people believing in sharing sharing the wealth or whatever, taxing the rich or whatever they do. So uh at any rate, so then I'm like, well, what's I'm not going to read this book because it's all just CIA propaganda. I mean, the guy's like, he says right out in the beginning, it's so in other words, you can have a whole detailed book about Vietnam, and all they have to do is rely on that filter where they're saying, they're protecting the South from the North and blah blah blah. When in fact, as Douglas Valentine explained, and along with Noam Chomsky, I had reread Noam Chomsky's book At War with Asia, and the whole point was like, well, the the Vietnamese actually they had worked with the U.S. to get the Japanese out during World War II, but then just like in Korea, the Vietnamese, they wanted independence from colonialism, so they were kicking the French out, and the French were like, "Okay, well, this." I'm simplifying it, obviously, but they're basically like, "Okay, we'll have elections," and the problem was is that the communists would have easily won the elections, and everybody knew that. So then the French and then the U.S. they worked to sabotage the elections. They wouldn't allow the elections. I can't remember what happened. It's like, oh, they set up basically like a phony election, and that's another whole nother thing topic you can get into. So you get into the quagmire there when and so that's sort of the situation in the U.S. right now. I mean, it's a dangerous situation, and of course, I could see this coming for decades. And I don't know. The only thing about the I call it imperial implosion. That was the term I coined in 1996. Imperial implosion. So that was like 30 years ago almost. You could just see it happening. And it's just like any empire, we're overextended in our military spending to try to support this oil military regime, and and so then you have to cut back on domestic spending, and then inequality of wealth gets worse, and that's the main cause of violence in any culture. It's well proven that if when you have inequality of wealth, that causes violence. And it's just a matter of how you define the inequality of wealth. So some people think, well, you can become less unequal of wealth if you just like brown nose the elite. If you just like worship the elite, then it's going to trickle back down. But then the rational viewpoint is like, well, actually, the elite don't create jobs. It's the middle class. Like, if you have to pay people enough so they can spend the money, and that's what keeps the economy going. And then, of course, you have the unearned income. Their viewpoint is like, well, they're they don't want to pay people too much for obvious reasons, because that's where their wealth is coming from, and that's the whole Marxian critique of capitalism, of course. But but then the real problem is that you have this whole debate going on, and meanwhile, the natural resources are getting destroyed at an accelerating rate. And that's where my viewpoint was like, well, both of these positions are wrong because they're both based on the wrong mathematics of the from Platonic, from that was based in the wrong music theory. And so that brings us all the way back to this this Brazilian pianist. That's why I stopped playing piano. My own personal view. I mean, if you want to be like a real musician, you have to play, it's like 6 hours a day. I knew that because I was with people in high school. I went to a music camp, and there was, they wanted to be professional musicians. And at that point, I was already really into free jazz, and punk music, and noise, and avant garde, and all that. And so I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was like they were trying to be classical professional musicians, um and then after that I played free jazz with a street musician. He was a street flutist, and he told me about Cornbread Harris. He's a blues musician in Minneapolis. There's a brand new book that just came out about him. There's an article in today's newspaper about the book. And um Yeah, he's 97 years old, I think, and then his son is this famous, I think he worked with Prince or somebody, and he lives in LA now as like a music. He probably like worked with Prince in LA, I'm guessing. I don't know, but his name's like, I'm embarrassing myself because I don't know. This guy's famous, but his name's like something Jam. Somebody can correct me in the comments if they know. Um, but I know Cornbread Harris. His dad was a blues pianist, and my free jazz buddy, he told me about Cornbread Harris. And so Cornbread Harris, he's finally getting his credit due, as a blues musician in Minneapolis and African American. And um So it all goes back to blues. I would say, like, if you stick with, like, blue I the irony is I was gonna major in what I was calling global blues, and it was gonna be a self-designed music degree, and before they said my music was communist, and I'm like, "This is stupid," you know? So I dropped out, and I'm glad I did, you know. And but the thing is that when I met qigong master Jim Nance, he had been in a band in the 1980s and the 90s. They kept going until he got into qigong, um, and they called it global blues. That was their genre, and I had never heard anybody else use that term, global blues. So we got an emergency vehicle. Oh, it's a tow truck. Okay, anyway, so I've just been rambling. There's actually 2 people listening. Well, you could say hi in the chat. I'm sorry to make you listen to me ramble. Hope you're not feeling obligated. Um, yeah, so that kinda I stopped playing piano, and some people sometimes will ask me, "Well, you know, do you play piano anymore?" And I'm like, "No, but that's what got me into meditation, and I think of my body as my music instrument," you know, and that's when I started to lose people, you know? I'm like, "Yeah, I've written books about it," and, um so, like, if you can get into something that obscure, maybe you'll just stay out under the radar of the whole fascism versus communism insanity. Hey, wow, nice. Are you in England proper, or I don't even know. I always say the UK because I don't. Some people say, "Well, I'm English," but um, well, okay, yeah, that was another thing they mentioned in this Netflix documentary is it turns out that when bossa nova came back to the US, it actually was more popular. Oh, cool. It was more popular than, the Beatles, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that bossa nova topped the charts bigger than the Beatles even. Um, and of course, when they mention the Beatles, it's like, well, yeah, I grew up listening to the Beatles all the time, like every day. All right, I'm gonna take off now, and you all take care. And it's been fun letting me ramble. Thanks.